Thanks for tuning in. My name's Andre Servin, and you're listening to Off the Roost Podcast, brought to you by Off the Roost Custom Calls, turkey calls for the serious hunter. Join me and my co-host, Paul Murdahl, as we delve into the world of the wild turkey, covering everything from calling tips and tactics and hunting strategies to the latest equipment available, featuring interviews from special guests and custom call giveaways. We'll do our best to keep you up to date on this obsession we call turkey hunting. We appreciate you joining us. Now let's get on with the show. All right, so me and Paul, we are here with Derek Anderson of Bayside Legion. I'd like to thank him for coming on here and doing this podcast with us. So today, kind of what we want to talk about, what we want to do is really just a what I would consider just a typical day of you going out there and kind of doing your thing. Either you show up to a state that you haven't been to, or whatever the case may be. So when you show up somewhere new, or just a new property in general, I imagine locating birds is the first objective. So kind of how do you go about doing that?
Well, if I'm arriving to a new state, chances are just the way that I roll, I'm probably going to get there in the dark because I can't see letting a morning go to waste. So I'm probably going to get there, whatever time in the morning, because I'm going to drive all night to do so. And that first step into the woods is going to be before light. Basically off of studying maps, I'm going to make an assessment on where I think birds are. If I think I can do a decent job at that, I'll probably just walk into that area a couple hours before light and just sit down and then just let the woods wake up. And that's going to give me my first indication on whether I made a good call or not. There's a downside to doing it that way because you might end up too far deep and you might not be anywhere near a bird. I know a lot of guys will hang back and wait for the birds to sound off before, they charge after them. But I tend to try to use everything I can to put myself as close there as possible for that first morning wake up.
For sure.
That's helped me in the past, and it's cost me as well. So there's two sides to look at that.
When you're going in, you say you'll pick an area on the map. What's going to make you gravitate towards an area? Is it going to be, a point, high? You're going to be in a clearing? What would you gravitate towards, when you show up right away and you don't have a clue what you're going for? Where are you going to go for your first morning to listen?
Right. Part of that's going to depend on, what part of the country I'm hunting. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit different if I'm in the gorgeous hill country like Minnesota or Wisconsin. I'm looking. I'll probably get out on a long finger ridge, over top of draw so that, I can kind of be near where I visualize a turkey being roosted. If I'm in the mid, we'll go a little farther south of you, in like Kansas or Oklahoma or something, getting in tight to a creek bottom, might be smarter to stand up a little higher so that way you can get a feel for all the birds in the area. But I have a tendency to dive right into where I think a bird's going to be.
So you're going to pick a spot on the map and say, that looks like a spot where a turkey might roost right there. And you're going to go in and get close to that area there. And then you're going to start listening.
Absolutely.
Okay, so cool. So basically kind of what you're getting at is how some guys they'll hit a road or they'll hit a parking spot. They'll get out of the truck, they'll sit on the tailgate, or I'll stand up in the cab so I'm a little bit taller, and I'll open the door so I'm like a foot taller or whatever, so I could listen a little bit more. But you're right, there is the downside of that is you can maybe cover more ground traveling roads and hearing, but then you're, X amount of distance away from the bird. And I guess, on the other hand, picking a spot and going in there and listening, you could also maybe hear nothing. But on the other hand, you can potentially be right where there's a bird, or at least within earshot of a bird. And that's what you're doing, right? So you're not kind of traveling the road system. And I'm sure there's different times call for different situations, different tactics, but it seems like you're kind of just picking a spot and diving in. Is that correct?
That is my preferred tactic there for sure.
Okay. Do you use any sort of locator calls when you're doing that, or you just let the woods wake up by themselves?
If I'm going into where I think a bird is, I'm just going to let it happen naturally. If I were to hang back, I do like owling, but even then, while I don't think owling hurts anything and it's very effective, I just kind of like letting the morning take its course.
Feels more organic that way.
What type of situation do you think would make you want to hold back?
If I was running really late.
We're just running late, so you're not holding back on purpose. You're already back because of time constraints.
Yeah, if time constraints hit there, like I said, if I'm arriving to a new spot and I got the time to do such, I'm going to try to get where I best can paint that. Just in the off chance that I pick correctly, and I've had times where it's worked very well, and I've had times where it hasn't. So,
right,
it's. I guess if you're sitting down and you hear a bird gobble and he's a mile and a half away, then you say, all right, time to get up and run.
All right. So say you do it a little differently and you don't show up in the dark in the morning. Say you show up at like 5 in the afternoon.
Well, that would be ideal. That would be the smarter situation. Obviously, I'd love to get out there and try to put a bird to bed, because that's going to give you the perfect opportunity to get close to them. In that case, your visual aids are prime. Like if you could drive around, spot birds in fields, if that's available to you, that can get you that leg up before they go to bed. And I'm not afraid if I got a couple hours before dark and it's in a state where it's legal, I'll grab the gun and hit the ground running, try to strike one up. I'll keep my distance a little bit and work a little slower in those situations, but obviously the idea is to try to locate a bird before bedtime, and if they want to die at that point, that's a great thing.
So are you going to be targeting, say, like the same area that you would be if you showed up dark in the morning? You're going to go, you got that waypoint and you're going to work your way to that spot?
Yeah, I might be trying to do something along those lines for sure. Obviously, if you driving roads or something and you see a bird somewhere else that might be a little different, then that might change plans rather quickly.
Right.
But, yeah, the principle is still the same.
Yeah, and from a couple of the videos I watched, doesn't sound like you're real shy about asking for permission either.
No, sometimes you got to do it, and certain places, I've learned it's a lot nicer to be able to get permission. Like if I ask around home, I don't stand a chance, like at all. But other parts of the country, it's a little different, and nothing wrong with knocking on the door. I don't have an issue with that there at all.
Right. All they can do is tell you no.
Yep.
I'm actually glad that you kind of mentioned like evening hunting. So I kind of want to pick your brain about that a little bit, because there's been times I feel I'm a little bit too conservative in my approach of evening hunting, because I know there's guys that will post up outside of a like a typical roost location. Maybe they heard a bird there in the morning, or they've heard one in the past, and basically kind of getting set up within 50 yards of that tree and just kind of waiting for a tom to kind of show up. I know my approach for evening hunting, I'd rather, and maybe I need to get a little bit more aggressive, but I'd almost rather cut him off on his way to the roost tree. But I also like to put myself in a position where if they don't talk, I can at least maybe hear some wings flap on
Yes.
this area or that area to give me an idea of where there might be a bird for tomorrow. And I try to basically put myself in the highest odds location for hearing and maybe seeing. But on the downside of that is I'm not so tight to the roost tree, and maybe I don't get an opportunity at that tom coming back, or he takes a different route, whatever the case may be. How, in your opinion, I guess, is getting tight to a roost tree in the evening, waiting for that bird to come back? Do you think there's a negative effect in doing that? Is that better suited in the morning, going in there and under the cover of darkness and being careful, playing your cards correctly, versus, because I feel with the evening, I don't know if it maybe disrupts that roost location for that bird.
Well, if you go straight for the roost tree, and that is where he's coming back to, you're counting on a lot of things to go right. And I'm not a big fan of deer hunting turkeys, so the whole sitting and waiting for him to show up, and particularly in that scenario, if he's coming back to a tree, that is not my favorite method. Not that I haven't done it. I've absolutely done it, but it's not my favorite method. You're gambling when you do that, because if you get tight and he pops his head up and, you're not where you need to be, and you spook that bird, you change the game for tomorrow big time. Mm-hmm. So in that situation, would it have been better off to keep your distance a little bit? 100%. Now, I like to get tight, and I love listening to him fly up. And my favorite part about doing that is when I know the exact limb that he's standing on, and I know exactly where to be in the morning so that he can land right in front of me. If you get a good feel for where he pitched up from, in my head, a lot of times, not all the times, obviously they don't always repeat themselves very often. So, but a lot of times in my head, they'll pitch down to a similar location that they flew up from. So I like to be able to get into a position where I'm going to be able to shoot that bird when he hits the ground. So by getting closer, you got a little better feel for that. But there's a gamble by doing that for sure. Mm-hmm. In the afternoon hunting, I'll take a fired up bird in a heartbeat, though. I'm not above that at all. Right. And I've been fortunate to find that scenario a handful of times, and I'll continue to look for that. Like I said, I'll act a little cautious because I don't want to disrupt where he ends up going to bed. But for the most part, I'll kind of run and gun a little bit in the afternoons. I might try it in a different spot. Say I hunted in the morning and I worked a bird in this location. I knew where he was roosted, but it didn't play out. I might return to that location like right at the last few minutes to see if I can put that bird to bed. And I'll spend the rest of the afternoon kind of running and gunning in a place where I didn't work a bird in hopes to strike one, that kind of thing.
For sure. You know what, too, man? And I feel like in states where you can do it, the afternoon, early evening is, I feel like a lot of guys are kind of missing out on that, because for me, I have had birds come rip roaring at 3 p.m. and like 5 p.m. And I don't mean like they were just cruising and you were able to like kind of fire them up. I mean, I'm talking like off of my first sequence, they're like double gobbling at that. And
right, the turkey fawns.
Yeah, and I think what could be the case with that, this could have been, and I think they are, because when I've checked the Spurs, it's like a 2-year-old, and I think it's a 2-year-old that wasn't the dominant bird. Nothing happened in the morning. He's been by himself. The boss has wandered off, and he's alone. And then a hen hammers within 100 yards of him, and he is like, "I am taking this,"
No, I've had some fun ones in the afternoon for sure, and that's the beauty of it.
Yes.
And I've had a lot of slow and non-eventful afternoons as well. So it's 6 to 1, half dozen to the other sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. So I know, and if I'm correct here, I believe you got 3 states left, right?
You're on the money.
And what do you got?
Louisiana, Kentucky, and Arizona.
Okay. So I hear Louisiana's a tough one, and I hear AZ is a tough one too.
Yeah.
Like it's hard to get in.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a challenge. It's a draw state. So you got 2 options there to draw into the state ground. I was fortunate to draw a state tag this year.
Dude, that's awesome, man.
So that was a good thing for me. That took 2 years applying for it to get a state tag, and that's just to hunt Merriam's. If you're trying to apply for a gold tag, you're looking at a 15 to 20 year investment.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think for me, as awesome as that would be, it's like a faster option to just go with an outfitter in Mexico and just get it done, you know?
For sure.
Cool, man. So I know when you're kind of doing that game, it's a whole lot of finding birds. So I feel like most kind of nut turkey hunters have at least maybe stumbled upon your channel at some point in time and seen it. But for those that haven't, and I know you mentioned this earlier, you're predominantly kind of doing a lot of mobile hunting, right? A lot of kind of run and gun. Not a whole lot of sitting and waiting, right?
Not my thing at all.
Okay.
Not that I won't, but it's not my favorite method.
And so how do you kind of go about your method? Because like I know there's a everybody kind of has their own kind of way of doing things. I know I'm pretty mobile myself. I have actually slowed down a little bit, and I'll mark on the map certain areas that I feel are strategic locations to either cast my call out into good areas or a good listening spot or whatever. And I try to kind of carefully make my way to these points. And then once I get to those points, sometimes I'll camp out there for 25 minutes to even an hour. And then I'll slink my way somewhere else. So, what's your game plan look like? How do you kind of plot out what you're going to do?
Well, ideally, I'm looking to hunt a gobbling turkey. So I try to stay motivated until I can find a gobbling turkey. There are situations, weather pending or certain areas where, the birds just aren't going to be gobbling, that you really need to slow things down a little bit. But I mean, I'm doing this for the same reason a lot of guys are, and I'm sure you are as well, where what gets my heart going is when he gobbles back to me. So if I don't have that, even if I know there's a bird in the area, if it's not going the way I want it to, I might leave that bird and try to, maybe come back to him a little bit later in the morning and hope he strikes up then. But I might go looking for one that's a little more in the mood per se.
So when you end up going, you don't like what you got going on now, and you go looking for one, are you just gonna, up and you're out of there and you're making it a beeline to the next spot? Are you gonna slowly make your way there and, pull up random trees here and there and throw out maybe a little blind calling, or are you gonna do more of a run and gun, where you're moving along, maybe a roadway or a trail or something, and, you'll stop and you'll throw out some calls and listen for a minute or two and then move along? How are you going to go about that?
There's times where I'll run trails, and kind of, we'll say yelping every so many yards, to try to get a feel for something. Generally, if I'm going to locate a bird, it's going to be with a yelp, or maybe some hard cutting. Once it's, daylight and I'm moving, I'm generally not using locators. And although every now and then I'll owl or do something crazy. A wood duck call is one that I'll keep in my pocket periodically, and I've had good luck on that one. But I'm just kind of moving along. We'll say slipping more than just kind of really pushing it. I tend to move slow but methodically, and I got my eyes peeled so that I'm not only just listening for the audio cues, which might be a drum in some situations. I can't tell you how many times that, you're slipping down a trail and you yelp and you're sitting there and you're listening, you expect a bird to gobble back for you and you don't hear that, but you do hear that. That's your clue.
Right.
So, it's not always just waiting on a gobble. I mean, nothing will get your heart racing like a drum of a bird, especially if you're not expecting it. But
I always find myself when I hear drumming, I have a hard time pinpointing it, and I always find myself looking up in the air for some reason, like it's going to help me.
Right. But I'll slip along and like say I'll work a creek bottom and just kind of casually walk through, scratch leaves a little bit, yelp a little bit. Just kind of looking for those visual cues as well. Keeping an eye out in front of me, and hopefully, maybe you'll walk up and see a bird a little bit in front of you, and you have that time to be able to react to him because you were slow enough about it that he didn't see you first. So,
right. So again, while you're working, through the woods, heading to your new area, is there going to be any type of sign that you're going to see that's going to attract your attention? Like scratching or tracks or maybe a dust bowl or something, or are you just going to look at them and just kind of note it, that there's turkeys in the area?
Yeah, all the above is a good thing. If you're seeing scratching, if you're seeing tracks, strut marks in sand, or a dust bowl, that's getting my attention for sure.
Right. Or will you set up around them areas a little bit, maybe do some calling then?
It depends on the situation, but yeah, sometimes that will prompt me to do that.
Right.
Like a hunt this year, I think I was in Ohio. I was it was an afternoon hunt. I'd gotten into the state late, so I'm kind of checking things out. So I knew the area that I wanted to be in, kind of coming into it. And I didn't want to push forward because I didn't want to spook a bird if he had been, somewhere in there. So I'm kind of slipping real slow, calling real light because I didn't want to blow things out, and hit a nice section of open oaks, saw that it was scratched to hell. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to camp here for a minute. So set up, and within 5 minutes of me sitting there, I yelped and I thought I heard a bird answer me. And the wind was kind of carrying my calls in a certain direction. And I was like, that sounded like a turkey. And, checked it a couple minutes later, and he's a lot closer now. And it was a pair of 2-year-olds, and they came right on a string, and it couldn't have been any prettier. And it was, and it, had I not keyed in on that scratching in that woods, I might have missed that opportunity. It might have spooked that bird.
Right. So now we're gonna take you back now. So, we were roosting birds earlier. So now you were successful and you roosted a bird, right? So now we're gonna go in on the morning, and you're gonna talk us through how you're gonna set up on them. It sounds like you're gonna get close. So for this one, you got one gobbler. You think it's just the one gobbler, and he's out on the end of the point, and you got in close to him. You're starting to get light. It's starting to get light. He starts gobbling. What are you going to do to initiate contact with them? You sound like you were going to call them. It didn't sound like you were going to just wait for things to happen and watch them fly down.
Before we dive into that, I want to know, is this bird a rope dragger, Paul?
Well, he won't know until he gets it.
All right. Well, I'm going to throw it out there. I think this bird has 1.5 inch spurs. So that's what we're dealing with.
All I can tell you, it's going to be one of the toughest hunts you've had.
And he gobbled once at night. That's it.
Gobbled once at night. All right.
So you're not 100% sure where he's at.
See?
No. So you got in tight. You got in tight, and you're getting ready to make contact with him. What are you going to do?
How tight's tight?
Well, so what do you like?
That was the question, right? How tight is tight for you?
If I can guess where he's at, and I got a good direction, from listening to him the night before, if he gobbled one time, I'm going to try to pinpoint that, and I'm going to try to get underneath him.
Really?
I'm not afraid, and I'm not shy about trying to get as close to a bird as possible.
Dude, I love that. And when you
So
say
you-
underneath him, do you really mean the tree that he's sitting in?
I've done it. That's not ideal for me, but I've certainly done it. But obviously, you're getting it in the dark,
Yeah.
to do that. But
Yeah.
if I roost a bird, that's my game plan. Is I want to be to where I can shoot where he pitches down to in the morning. And if I'm that close, which I'm going to know by where, if he gobbles or if I'm able to see him or hear his poop hit the ground, you kind of get the feel for how close you are. So
right.
if I'm to the point where if I were to make a call, he's just going to look straight down at me, I'm probably not going to call.
Right.
But I'm not shy about you. You guys watch my videos. I'm not shy about calling to a turkey on a limb, but I do like a little bit of distance in that scenario. I have certainly called to birds that could see me, and I have killed those birds. I'm sure I've cost myself by doing that on other birds. So, no, probably most turkey hunters wouldn't do that, but I'm not shy in that scenario. I'll do it. But yeah, I love getting in tight to a turkey and being in when he's within eyesight of you, or straight down, and like you're waking up with him because you get in there a couple hours or an hour early, you're taking a nap. I always call it a turkey nap. You're going to sit up against that tree. I always keep my shotgun rested right on my knee. Got a little knee rest that sits there so that I know it's going to be straight up and down, and I'll just kind of rock my head forward and I'll take my little nap, and then as it starts to open up, get a little light, you kind of you start picking up on the cues and the different sounds as other birds and the turkey starting to wake up. So to be there with them is one of my favorite aspects of turkey hunting. That's cool to me. And I don't know, I think I've had a lot of luck doing that. And there's a danger of getting that close to a turkey because he could pitch down and land behind you, which I've had happen. And you got to get real creative on how you're going to get out of that situation. Actually, pretty similar to when I hunted Minnesota a couple years ago. I had roosted a bird. He gobbled once or twice in the night, and I came out the end of this finger ridge, and I knew he was right off the side. I didn't know which side he was off of, and tried to get as close as I could. And it starts to get light, and there he is strutting. I'm like, okay. Now, I did not kill that bird because he pitched off to my hard right and probably landed, we'll say, 40 yards away, but I couldn't see him because of all these deadfalls that were piled up there. And then there was another bird that was a little bit farther down that I didn't know about until he started gobbling in the morning, and he came right up the ridge, got right up on that ridge top and came right to me. So at the time, like I tried to, when the first bird pitched down, I tried to get up and kind of move on him, but then that other bird just gobbled right behind me, and it's like, you know what, this one's coming. So
yeah, that was the second time you came to Minnesota, right?
It was the first pass through was that was during the 2020 season, and one thing that happened during that time was states were shutting down due to COVID, and they stopped license sales. So I got burned on that. My plans were to go to Nebraska and a couple other states that ended up shutting down license sales. So we impulse bought every state that we could to try to get ahead of that.
For sure. Yeah, I know you only hunted Minnesota for like 30 minutes or something, right? Because you were just passing through.
It was one morning, yeah.
Yeah, it was like a roll of the dice,
Came from North Dakota, hit Minnesota for one morning, and then hit Michigan the next morning, and then had to get back home.
For sure. Back to the roosting, man. That's my favorite thing to do in turkey hunting, man, is getting tight on a bird on the roost. And for me, I like to be able to, if I can see the bird, that's great. I like to see him, to be able to see him even pitch down. For me, I feel, I guess, if I roost a bird and I can't see him on the limb or see him pitch down, then for me, I guess in a sense, I feel I didn't get close enough. And for me, I guess my guesstimate number, I try to map it out to about 80 yards. So in the case where you get tight on a bird,
just to make a point, I'm not real good at roosting birds, so I'm learning quite a bit here from you two fellas.
And you know what? Paul, I was gonna share this with you. I have a tactic that I used last year for roosting, and it's been 100% correct so far. What I've been doing, so when I roost a bird, I get a gobble. I'm looking at it on the Onyx. I'll try to kind of sort of triangulate a little bit of where that bird's at. I'm like, okay, cool. So then I'll look where that is. I'll look at the satellite and I'll look at the topo. This is, for example, like if we're talking hill country, I'll always look where I think that bird is at. I'll look for a little bench, even if it's a small bench, because that's where I believe the bird's going to pitch down to, is that little bench area. And then I'll turn on the satellite and I'll look for the largest, the tree with a little bit of a shadow, the tree that looks like it's the largest, right in that vicinity. And I've had it be the case where that's the tree he's roosting in, and he will pitch down to that bench either in one direction or the other. He does land in that bench. But then also when I'm trying to pick my setup, I will do the same exact thing where I'll try to find the tree that is the largest on the satellite from just looking at the foliage, trying to decipher that. And that's normally like a really nice mature oak that's kind of a little bit flat and easy to sit on. So I actually have been meaning to share that with you, Paul. I
think you did actually go through that with me last spring.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't get to hear the gobbles at night, so I don't know where to look for them, and I don't know where to find the benches and stuff like that. So I'm the guy that's hanging back in the morning trying to hear gobbles. I mean, and I try to roost quite a bit. Usually my roost attempts though are, I'll go in early in the afternoon and I'll have an area that I'm planning on maybe working to. And I'll probably want to get to that area a couple hours before sunset. And I'll hunt my way in, and then I'll just sit and I'll try to, it won't be, I think he's going to roost on this point, and I'm going to go sit on that point. I'll just be in the area of that point, and I'll try to call the bird to me as he's coming to roost. And then for like the last half hour, the gun's in the lap, and I'm just sitting and listening. And then at that point, the hunt's over and stuff like that. I'm trying to get them roosted. And then a lot of times it'll be, owl hoots and stuff like that from a trail or from a road. But, I don't really have much luck. I'm not very good at it for some reason.
You just got to get aggressive with it, man.
Yeah, I'm sure that's about my goal. My thing with roosting birds is if I'm getting in too close and getting in, trying to pinpoint exactly where he's at, I'm thinking I'm going to be spooking other birds that are in the area. So I'm cool. I'm cool with just hanging back, and if they gobble, or I can get them to gobble, that's cool. I'll get on them on the next morning, and if they don't, then I'll be somewhere in the area standing there listening and getting ready to make a move.
Mm-hmm. So Derek, so let's say you get in tight and you're within, like, the bird can see you, so you have to be as still as possible, because let's say you sneak on in and you're 50 yards away from him. What do you do in that case, that aside from not moving, I guess at that point in time, have you ever had him kind of pick you off?
I have blown it in that scenario, but I'm pretty comfortable sitting underneath the bird. You get the point, like, where you just gotta move. Like, it pains you. It gets painful to sit there. Your lower back It starts to ache, and you're just like dying for like that inch scoot on your seat. You just kind of got to bear through that. If you can, you just got to know that the juice is worth the pain right there. Because if you can fight through it, keep those urges down, ignore that mosquito that's feasting on your temple, because that's inevitable. that itch, you want to adjust your face mask just a little bit. You just gotta stick to the game plan, because in your head that it's very easy to blow this scenario. The odds are not in your favor, so just kind of got to fight through the urges there, and hope that it plays out. And I've had, I guess, better luck sitting directly underneath the bird and not so much getting picked off from the tree, but say the bird pitches to maybe you're offside, or as soon as it hit the ground, blowing it right then. So it's like you did all the work, you have it right there, and that's where you get busted, is because it didn't land right in front of your gun barrel, and you tried to make a move that you should have waited for. I've had more instances like that where I've blown it than completely blowing it from the tree. Not that I haven't blown it from the tree, I have, and that's frustrating.
You always got random hens too that you could be maybe 20 yards away from a hen in a tree that you didn't know was there too, and that's always a possibility as well.
Right. So now, you say you're not shy about calling to him on the limb. Do you ever find it's happened to you where you're calling to him pretty aggressive, and he ends up staying up on the roost later than what would be considered normal fly down time?
Absolutely.
What's the longest you've had to sit under him?
I had one. This is one of the earlier videos once we started filming, but I was within eyesight. I could see the bird strutting on the limb, and for whatever reason, I poured it on a little heavier than I normally would have, and he stayed up there, and he was waiting to see a hen. He knew there was a hen down on the floor, and he was waiting to see me, and I cost myself by. I'm the reason he stayed up there as long as he did. It went probably well into an hour into daylight, and what saved me on it was I'd called a Jake up, so he was way back, back deep in the woods, and he was coming our direction, and as that Jake came through, that gobbler saw the Jake and pitched down to the Jake, and then he was right in front of my gun barrel at that point. So that was the situation. It made me sit there a lot longer than I needed to. Did I regret calling to him? Yeah, a little bit. But at the end of the day, it checked out.
Right. That was kind of going to be my next question. But yeah, you obviously have shot them once they've. But do you find that normally that when you call them like that and they stay up late on the roost, are they just dropping out of the tree, or are they soaring away and going the other way?
If that's happening, if they're pitching out and going like the complete opposite direction, I would say something wrong happened there. So they didn't like what you said. They saw you. You blew it in some form or shape, fashion at that point. I would think if it's a place that they would typically pitch out to now.
Or if you can't see him, he's maybe got a hen or something that he's going to meet up with, or he's following out of there or something.
Maybe he saw the hen,
right?
Saw the hen pitch down, and she's going away from you. So he saw her heading down the mountainside, so he's going after her.
Right.
A lot of scenarios can play out there for sure.
Right. So you see, you get you're calling to him on the roost. He hits the ground, and I would imagine you're going to hit him maybe while he's flying down, or as soon as he hits the ground. You're going to yelp, you're going to cluck at him, or you're going to get on him right away when he hits the ground.
Well, when I back up to the calling on the roost, I'm typically not going to call a lot. Like I'm not pouring it on a bird on the roost would be an extreme situation, I think typically I would, give it maybe a couple gentle tree yelps, just kind of let him know where I'm at, try to influence him, especially if I could see the bird and maybe he's facing a different direction. I might give him a little yelp to try to turn him so that he faces me and encourage him to come my direction. Obviously, I want to keep him facing me while he's on the limb. So after that, I'm not going to give it too much more than that. You got his interest at that point. So
Right.
say he pitches down. If he's out of range, like from there, you're going to play the game the best that you can, and that's as fun as it gets. Depending on the bird's temperature, if he's feeling good about himself that day, if he was ripping it up on the limb and he hits the ground, he's still continuing to yelp. Give him a little bit to catch his interest. I'm a big fan of kind of firing him up and shutting up.
I like that too.
Right.
Once you get him going and he's feeling it, and when you cut quiet on him, he's losing his mind. And then as long as you can continue to keep your mouth shut, which it's not my forte, I'll be completely honest there, but you're just building up the cards that you have in your hand because he wants to get to you and it's driving him nuts that you're not answering him.
Right.
So if you can build that suspense for him, the better your chances are. But again, I historically, I'm terrible about overcalling, so I will admit fault in that scenario 100% of the time. You get into that scenario where you're not sure where he's at, and you're like, I know he's going to pop up here any minute, so you give him that little yelp just to kind of check him, and then he gobbles back a little farther than you want him to be, and you're like, oh man, I shouldn't have done that.
Right. I mean, you hear guys, a lot. When they talk about calling the birds on the roost, it's like, all right, a couple clucks, maybe a couple tree yelps, and then it's going to be nothing. And if he's by himself, it's going to be whether I can see him or not. If I'm a good distance away from him, then I'm going to probably call a little more aggressive and try to get him to feel some urgency that he need to come over and check me out. And if I'm a little closer, then it'll probably be a little more subdued. But then I'm going to get to the next situation. So now I would imagine with you, you were saying you're not shy about calling to him on the roost. I would imagine possibly that might change if now you find yourself in a flock, say you got 3-4 gobblers and you got 5 hens or more, in the area, and they're all making noise. I would imagine you're just going to jump right in there. And
I do not like getting outbid by a hen. So if I get a mouthy hen, that I'm going to be giving it back.
Right.
I'm definitely a subscriber to that theory. At that point, you're no longer calling to the gobbler; you're calling to her. So.
Right, and the fact that the hens are already there, chances are you're on the losing side of the battle, most likely, anyways.
Yep.
So what's it gonna hurt to throw your hat in the ring and say, "Hey, look, I'm over here. One of you guys come over here and take a look at me." I don't see where you'd lose in that situation.
Yeah, if I can mimic her and kind of piss her off a little bit to where she's going to come at me, all I can hope is that he's in tow. He's right there with her, and
right.
Those they'll get them in trouble a lot.
What I think can even maybe help in that situation is, let's say they acknowledge you, but you still lose, right? The hen hears you, doesn't like this new gal in town. She pitches down away from you, takes a tom with her, and let's say you let them drop down into a valley or wherever, you let them drift off, and then you loop back around again and start calling. The hen might be like, this girl, she's freaking back again, and you know what? I've had it with her. And she might go and try to run you off and bring them in. I know I had something like that happen, and I blew it because I tried to loop it, and I underestimated how fast they were maybe walking, and then as soon as I tried to cross the valley, they saw me and And that was the end of it, but she was pretty pissed, man, coming and cutting the whole time, pop, 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 pop.
Oh, that's fun when you get a girl fired up like that. It can get interesting.
For sure. So I'm curious, in the case where like you can see the bird very, very well and he can see you, will you still call to that bird, or is that when you're just like a statue?
I certainly have, but I would prefer to not.
Yeah.
It's better. It's in your best interest to not do that, I think.
We're talking about a bird that's already on the ground, right?
No, I'm saying like, let's say you got a bird roosted. Let's say maybe you get in tighter than you thought you were going to get, and like basically you can't move at all. I was curious if he would still choose to call to that bird, but I imagine that Tom would look at the blob.
Yeah.
And it would just make him nervous, I think. And maybe he responds, but he might pitch away from the blob,
Yeah, I've definitely done it. But as I said, if you can see what direction the bird's facing, that's, I'll try to use that, get him facing my way, then show.
Right.
So I'm not going to say I'm not going to call in that scenario, because I've certainly done it, but it would be in my best interest to not do that, I think, most times.
What you're saying is generally if he's facing the other way, you're just going to give him a little bit just to try to turn him around.
Little encouragement. Yep.
Right.
Yeah, I know sometimes I'll wait for a gobble, or if he does strut on the limb and turn around a little bit and just give him a little bit right there, so he doesn't maybe exactly pinpoint, like it's a little muddy, where exactly. And they know where it's kind of coming from, but I don't know if maybe it messed with him a little bit, and where he's just like, did I hear a hen? I think I heard a hen, So.
Oh, I am certainly, and I learned this trick from sitting underneath turkeys, but when he gobbles, you'll have a hen just kind of go, yo, 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 or even a jake sometimes will do that, just kind of like honoring the gobble almost.
Right.
I'm a big fan of doing that, just because I think it's realistic.
Do you use like gobbler jake yelps in your calling a lot, or?
Oh, it gets thrown in there for sure.
Yeah. It seems nowadays you're starting to hear a little more of that guys using gobbler and jake yelps. Back before when I first started, there wasn't really a lot of talk. Back in the early 90s or whatever, you really didn't hear a lot of talk about people using gobbler and jake yelps.
They were doing it, but
they were doing it, but they weren't telling you about it.
Not talking about it.
Right.
So, all right. So I don't know if we've maybe drifted away. I think we kind of have, but that's okay. So we got this cool bird roosted, right? I'm going to just declare he's a rope dragger. He's got 1.5 inch spurs. He gobbled once. You get in tight on the bird, and I guess what's the game plan? You're going to call to him a little bit.
It's reading him. It's all about reading the turkey, how he's feeling that day. If he's fired up, it's going to change completely how I assess the situation. If he gobbles one time on the limb, and that's it, he's not going to hear a whole lot from me. I'll give him a little bit just to let him know where I stand, and then I'm going to wait for him to pitch down and assess the situation from there. Does he get a little more heated up once he hits the ground? Are there hens in the mix? There's a lot of variables that's going to change how you approach the situation, but hopefully you can give him a little bit to convince him to head your way. If that's going in your favor, then you shouldn't have to do a whole lot, and hopefully you're just waiting on him to show up. But obviously there's a lot that can go wrong in that too, and he might pitch down and start going the opposite direction, and then you're left with a couple of options, whether you're going to get up and chase after him, or how you're going to handle that situation. And I'm a chaser. I'll follow turkey the best I can. I want to stay as close to that bird as I can. I want to get into his bubble, get to that point where he feels comfortable saying, all right, I've had enough and I'm going in. And sometimes, that bubble might be 150 yards. Sometimes it might not be till 50, 60 yards away, but I feel like
Right.
they all have it at some
And
point.
and it might take you 3 hours to get there.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the chasing thing, because I know. So Paul, I know for you, I know we've spoken about this before, and you've told me you'll do chasing, but the times that you have done it, it seems like it's a little bit low odds, right? Like it doesn't work out for you a whole lot statistically over the years.
Well, it's not so much that as I think it's my decision making when I decide to go do chase them. I'm usually a little late on the decision, and they're usually cleared out of the area by the time I get up to where I heard the last gobble, and I can't keep contact with them.
Mm-hmm. So
I'm always sitting there waiting for that one last confirmation gobble when I said, "Man, it sounds like they're moving away from me." And I wait for that last confirmation gobble, and he probably did it, but by that time he was out of ear sight. And by the time I get up there, they're gone. I can't find them again. Happens to me a lot.
Derek, so what would you say for you? How does the whole chasing them thing work out for you?
I mean, you certainly, each situation's a little bit different. A lot of times I'll end up on a chase that's completely fruitless, and I'll end up in a similar situation like Paul mentions, where the bird's getting it, and you hit that point where it's like, all right, where's he at? And you lose contact with him. And once you lose contact with him, it's kind of difficult to regain that, especially if he's really covering ground. I know the first couple of times I hit Miriam's country, and still having that ingrained that if a bird's going, you go with him. That was a fun and very challenging experience out there, where you're dealt with terrain that's a lot steeper than anything that happens on the East Coast. So that's a fun game. And Miriam's, they'll just gobble to gobble. So you'll be able to chase them, but they're a lot better at it than you are.
Oh, for sure. I've chosen to not even chase them. If I hear them and they're gobbling away from me, shoot. I mean, I take a mental note of the direction they're going in, but I guess I don't make a true, genuine effort to chase them because they cover so much ground so fast. It's, for me, like I feel like I've had them be in earshot and then just totally be out of earshot, or maybe they choose to not talk, but I know I've had those things just like book it, man. So what was I gonna say? Okay, so let's say you're in a new state, you got there, you did your trick of you picked a spot, you had bird roosted, maybe he pitched down away from you, and he's henned up, he's trailing away from you. Do you decide to chase that bird, or do you let that bird go and go after a new bird? Now remember, this is a new spot. You hit it. I don't know, if you have enough time to invest in following that bird, or if you're just gonna say, you know what, I'm not gonna deal with that bird. I'm gonna go try to find a new one. But then at the same time, being in a new state or a new location, and you do have a bird on hand, will you just kind of abandon that bird that's drifted off, or are you going to try to kind of stick with that bird?
Depends how well he's gobbling. If I'm to the point where I'm struggling to keep up with him because he's barely gobbling, or I know he's with hens and he just completely, went all but quiet, get the occasional gobble here and there, and you've lost a lot of ground, and you're really struggling to keep up with him, I might leave that bird in search of a better bird. But if he's still going, if he's still talking, and I haven't heard a better situation, I'd be pretty reluctant to leave it. But I'm not above leaving a turkey to find a turkey. I'm looking for a good gobbling bird, and if I have it in front of me, he might not be ready to die right at this moment, but as long as he's keeping me invested in telling me where he is, and I have the ability to keep track. Now, if he's 600 yards on a private land and I'm sitting at a fence line, am I wasting my time? You just got to evaluate the situation. Say, how much time do you have? Like, I love fence line birds for some stupid reason. And I've wasted a lot of time sitting at a fence. So I try to avoid that if possible. So if I think there's a better scenario and it's like, man, I got hours before this guy's going to be interested in coming back to me, I'm going to be trying to find a better scenario.
So when you leave out to go find something better, are you doing that with the plan on possibly returning?
Always.
Right.
Yeah. Just because not
returning in a couple hours is what I was getting at, not like 2 days later.
No, come back 10 o'clock.
Right.
Might be a different game at 10 o'clock. And unless you got, when you jump spots and, maybe you got on something better there or run a gun for a couple hours, nothing came up out of it, return back to that bird that you were on in the morning, and it might be the time for him. It might not be.
Right.
I don't know, like, what your personal, like, when it comes to planning out these trips, when doing that, what time do you allot yourself in a place? Are you doing it like 3 days, 4 days? What's like kind of your ideal, like, I'm going to give myself this amount of time. That's around what I shoot for.
When I plan trips, I generally kind of like take 3 days as a standard. I feel like 3 days is a good feel. If you come into a new area and you got 1 day kind of locate, get your plan together. By day 2, you need to be executing day 3. If you're unable to do that, and you're really not in the game by day 3, you need to be changing something up in some way, form, whether that's driving to the opposite side of the state. I'm not afraid to make a move in that kind of regard. It can be frustrating sometimes, but that's all part of the game. But generally, 3 days is a good one. And I would say, sometimes you can execute on day 1, depending if luck's on your side. Mississippi took me 18 days, combined between 2 different years. So, it doesn't always go the way you want it to. But
yeah, I'm glad you brought up Mississippi, man. Paul actually was able to get a tag for Mississippi last year, which I'm sure, as you're aware, they've moved to kind of the lottery system for non-resident. So I thought that was cool that the first time Paul put in for it, he got it. I was like, oh, great. And I know he kind of had a hard time with the Mississippi birds being kind of on the property boundary, and he kind of seemed to kind of be playing that game with those birds.
Certain areas. But the biggest problem I had, I think, down there, was not knowing how to deal with the open. A lot of the woods I was hunting, they burn them like every third year or whatever it is. So there's no deadfalls, there's no bushes, there's no nothing. It's like a pasture almost with trees in it. It is barren. And then we had a bunch of issues with just bad weather. Cold front would move in, they'd stick around for 2 or 3 days, and then it would be 90 degrees. 2 days later, it would be back, rainy and cold again. And then, towards the end of the trip, it started getting fairly nice out, and the birds started gobbling and stuff like that. And the 2 gobblers that I did get on finally had the hens come in and take them away. So.
Gotcha. Yeah, Mississippi was a tough one for me. Like I said, I had the first stint there. I was in that first week of April, and actually I heard birds gobble most days, and then just didn't fail to execute.
Right.
I didn't have turkeys, just didn't make things happen.
Right. I got down there for the opener and stayed for a little over 2 weeks, and I think probably in the first week and a half, I maybe heard a total of maybe 3 or 4 gobbles. You know, you'd hear a couple on the roost. Well, it was probably more than that. You know, I think the first morning I get into one spot, and they gobbled fairly decent on the roost. But then as soon as they hit the ground, it was nothing. And it was, if you did get lucky enough to hear a gobble in the morning or 2 or 3, as soon as they hit the ground, it was nothing. And not being familiar with the area, you have no idea where they're going, where they will look for them. So it was kind of tough. Once they started gobbling towards the end of the trip, you know, they were pretty responsive. But you know, like I said, they were still had plenty of hens around yet to come in and mess things up.
Right. Yeah, it's a frustrating place, especially when, you know, like I said, I'm not big on deer hunting turkeys, and
Right.
When you go days and days without hearing a bird gobble, it seems like it's the only option.
I could see where, you know, in some of the cases where I was hunting, where a decoy would help, but I don't personally use a decoy.
Yeah, I'm not particularly a fan myself.
Right.
So, I'm curious. In Mississippi, was it were there birds there? They just weren't talking, or you were having trouble finding them?
Oh, they were there.
Just weren't talking. You know.
Yep. Yeah. The second go round, I started off on opening day, and I hunted that first 11 days. And of those 11 days, I heard birds talk on 3 of those days, 3 of the 11.
Right.
Wow.
So I found the bird that I ended up killing on day 10. And then the 11th day was my very last day that I had to hunt before I had to get back on the road.
Yeah.
And it was during a thunderstorm.
Yeah, for whatever the first week and a half or whatever. I mean, it was pretty much the same scenario that you were talking about. You know, just not very much gobbling.
Well, what I was gonna say is, you know, it could be pretty disheartening to like go down there and like wait 10 days to hear a gobble, man. It's like, I'd be like, oh man, like this sucks, you know.
I remembered what it was. It was, you know, you hear the gobble here and there, but it was the first cold front that came through, and I know the temperatures got into the teens, and I want to say they got into the single digits. And of that first, you know, say 10 days, that was the best gobbling that I had heard during that time period.
Yeah.
Was when it was super cold like that.
Little snap. It's what they needed, maybe.
Right. But then the next day it was nothing.
Yeah.
And it was probably raining after the cold front for a couple of days. And then it got warm, and then the thunderstorms overnight. I was actually down there last year when that big tornado went through that one town and killed all them guys.
Okay.
When I was originally hunting wasn't, you know, it was not too far away from there, but I seen the storms were coming in on the forecast, so I kind of made a trip to the center of the state and checked things out there, did a little reconnaissance down there for the weekend, and then came back. And it seemed, you know, that was probably getting close to the end of my trip, and the birds in the center of the part of the state were gobbling better than the ones in the northern part of the state. And by the time I got back into the northern part of the state, I had a couple days left, and I kind of monkeyed around with some areas that I should have stayed away with. But they started picking up in the northern part of the state too. So,
Gotcha.
And that would have been right around the first week of April somewhere.
So here's a kind of a little bit of a random question I kind of want to ask you, and I've been asking all our guests that kind of have families and stuff, because, you know, I'm friends with you on Facebook, and I see you got, you know, you're married, you got a family. I'm kind of new to that journey. You know, I have a 17-month-old, and we have another baby coming. How do you go about like that balance of being a dad, being present for your kids, not pissing the wife off too much by being gone? What's the balance there? What's the secret? I'm trying to learn that. I'm trying to figure that out.
I guess the first question is, how many trips on average do you go on in a spring?
Well, It's a few. I mean, I'd be on the road for 2 weeks on, ideally 3 times a year. My job kind of changed a little bit, so I don't have the flexibility that I did a couple years ago. Because now the way I have to structure my PTO changed a little bit, but I'm taking 4 weeks during the spring for sure. But as far as getting the wife on your side, you gotta pick them good. We kind of went over it at the very beginning stages of our relationship that this was something that I was very passionate about, and she's phenomenal, and she respects that. I can't say she's always happy with me going out on the road and kind of leaving her at home, but she knows that it makes me happy, and she's very supportive in that regard, and I can't thank her enough when it comes to that. The child aspect of it, I have a daughter. She's about to turn 9, and that is a very frustrating part of it because you want to be there for your kid. That's a rough part to kind of be as absent as the spring brings you. But I hope one day, I'll be able to share those experiences with her, and she'll kind of understand where that comes from. But it's kind of, I guess, part of life for them at this point. They got well used to, Dad's going to disappear during the springtime, and that's just how it is. But
as long as there's no birthdays or anniversaries in that time period, you're probably good to go.
Well, I very intentionally did not get married in the springtime. We waited till June to do that, so that was by design. I think she was trying to go for an April wedding, and I said absolutely not.
Right.
Well, sounds good. We're at 1 hour and 19, so I mean, if we want to go ahead and call it here, we can do that, or we can keep talking about turkeys.
I'm good to keep talking. I don't know what you guys got planned.
You want to talk turkeys, Derek?
I can keep talking turkeys. Let's go.
Turkeys.
Okay, so another thing that I was going to ask when I heard you guys talking. Do you have a favorite state that you've hunted? Is it home? That seems to be the answer, is always home.
Should say favorite state and, possibly a favorite terrain.
Favorite state?
Where do you...
I want to say that's a hard one, but I don't know if it is. There's definitely certain areas that I've just fell in love with. I got to say, if I had to pick a favorite, though, I'm going to go with Hawaii.
Oh, really?
There's something magical about being on top of a volcano at 9,000 feet elevation and having clouds form below you. And because the air's so thin, you can hear all the way down almost to the coast. And not so much on the public, but just being able to hear that far, you'll hear turkeys gobble all the way down to the coast. And it's an incredible, incredible feeling. So that's just a truly magical place.
So when you do Hawaii, you have to go with an outfitter, correct?
No.
Really? You can hunt public out there. Is there public?
There's public ground. There's 3 different areas that are for public access.
Well,
wow.
Here's the big question. So when you hunt Hawaii, do you have to bring your wife?
I had to bring my wife.
Paul, I'm actually thinking about doing the same thing with Florida because, I feel like you can get away with those. It's easier to get away with those,
Right.
So here's what happened in Hawaii with that, because we went there and we both, Bonds and I went. We took our parents as well as our wives, thinking that the girls could kind of go do their thing and enjoy that. But then we got our butts kicked by the turkeys, and it was taking a little longer than necessary to do what we thought. We're going in thinking, oh, Rios, this is going to be cakewalk. Well, it wasn't at all. That was not easy hunting in any stroke of the imagination. So when we actually realized what we were up against, it was like, man, we're spending every day out here on this volcano and, spending no time exploring Hawaii like we kind of promised our wives we would do. But at the same time, you're there to kill a turkey. I'm not coming off that island without killing a turkey. So we were grinding.
I'm sure the wives kept themselves busy.
They kept occupied, but
right
towards the end of the trip, it was like, you guys need to be experiencing some of this with us. And it was like, all right, we gotta get one more day in here. And then finally things kind of came together, and we were able to get some taste of it. But man, what an
was it that those Rios don't act like Rios? Like, do they act a little more like Miriam's? Is that what was going on?
There was a big distance. Hawaii and Florida are probably one of the two places that I would say there's such a drastic comparison in terrain between the public ground and the private ground. So while both places have plenty of turkeys, like the habitat just not as turkey friendly.
Yeah.
On the accessible ground. So
yeah.
You could sit on a fence line and listen to turkeys all day long, but catching one where you can actually do something about it, that seemed to be a harder find for sure.
Probably not as user friendly neither, I'm guessing.
No, it was like 4-wheel drive required to access any of the roads.
Right.
It's a very challenging environment. There's no trees hardly, little shrubs is what they're roosting on, sometimes rocks.
Wow.
I still don't know what they eat. There's no main sources of water. So
everything.
Yeah, it's crazy. But it was awesome.
Wow.
So
yeah, man, that's on my list too, man. And I'll be honest, I'm probably just going to go with an outfitter when I do something like that. I plan on bringing the family out there, and that way I get out there and for the most part get it done for sure within 2 to 3 days. And then I'm back with the family doing the whole thing. I'm not like dying to do Hawaii or whatever. It's one of those, like I said, like a double whammy, you get the points for taking the family on the trip, and then you get your turkey while you're at it too. Do you have a least favorite state so far?
I mean, as
like
far
a state you're just never going back.
Yeah, I would say one of the most, I guess, difficult things about doing this is, like, I would go back to any of them in a heartbeat.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Rhode Island wasn't particularly fun for me, but then when I finally had that bird that just, that it was the bird, that was like a great hunt. But getting into that situation was, a challenge to get to. So Mississippi was a very challenging one for me. Do I say I don't want to go back there? No, I got my butt kicked. I want to go back to try to even the score a little bit. So
right.
I always have that. It's even the states that I disliked. I'm going to find a way to get back into it.
I'll be putting back in for the drawing for Mississippi this spring.
The spirit.
All right. I got a bone to pick with the Mississippi gobblers.
Nevada was the state that I was glad to see. I was glad to see I was able to check it off, and probably not going to be in a hurry to go back to that one, but it was incredible and it was gorgeous, and I had a great hunt, but it was just the circumstances that made it very frustrating, and it was a high level of anxiety through that because, yeah, that was an off-ball one.
So I'm curious, I guess your plan for 2024, are you going to hit those 3 states that you need and that's the main priority? And on any of these years, do you ever go and hunt states that you've already checked off your list, but you just enjoy hunting there and you want to give it another go? Do you do that? Or do you try to kind of prioritize the states you're trying to check off?
I'm definitely going to be prioritizing that I need this year. Lord willing, I'm able to hunt a lot of other states as well. I'm certainly going to hunt locally, which when I say locally, I live in Northeast Maryland, so I'm very close to Pennsylvania. I'm very close to Delaware. I'm not far from New Jersey. I'm very close to Virginia. West Virginia is not even that far for me. So I got a handful of states, including my home state, that I call local states, that there are always options for me. As far as the big trips, obviously I have those 3 states in mind, but with any trip that I plan, I'm going to, plan for, worst case scenario, what happens if I enter Louisiana and Louisiana's kicking my butt, and do I stay the entire time? That might be what happens. But I'm also going to plan for what happens if I kill a turkey on day one in Louisiana. Where do I go? So that's always in the back of my mind. I always have that next step ready to go in case things go well.
So how long have you been putting in for the draw in Arizona?
It was 2 years.
2 years?
I did not go last year.
You may be waiting another decade or so before you get the...
Yeah, there's reservation land in Arizona, so there is an alternate option.
Right.
You can also get an archery tag to hunt state ground over the counter. So there are other.
Would that be an approach? Because you bow hunt too, right? I think you got a buck shoot a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I shot a buck. That was actually with rifle.
Okay.
But I do bow hunt. I really enjoy bow hunting. I have not really dabbled with that too much into the turkey side of things. I think the little bit that I have played, I've missed 2 turkeys with a bow. So I haven't played around too much.
Yeah, I contemplated just because I'm going to be out of commission for April. What's that, Paul?
Just it doesn't sound like bow hunting would fit into your preferred style of hunting anyways. It sounds like you're a pretty mobile guy. I don't see where, generally you think bow hunting, you're sitting in a blind, deer hunting them, kind of like you say.
Yeah, there's guys that do it right though. Jordan Barnes of Close Proximity is one, man. That guy, he is on fire when it comes to that. And he hunts turkeys the way turkeys are meant to be hunted and does it all strictly with the bow. And I can't tip my hat enough to that fella.
For sure. Yeah, he's the guy for that, for sure.
Even gets into doing it right with his recurves on there.
Yep. This for 2024, I was kind of kicking around the idea of putting in for Nebraska because, for the early season archery, I did kind of kick that idea around. Was talking to Paul about it, and I don't know, man, something about being in like that western unfamiliar terrain with maybe 1.5 feet of snow on the ground, just like kind of deterred me from it,
That is the downside. That's that early in the season, you never know what you're going to get.
For sure. And you could show up the day of and it's cool, and then overnight you get 8 inches or something like that, and then now you're stuck with that.
Right.
So seeing as you're an East Coast, Northeastern, what's your favorite? You dig hunting them in the hardwoods, or do you prefer to hunt them somewhere else?
Oh, I'm definitely a hardwoods guy,
right.
For sure. Something magical about a bird booming through the woods.
Right.
And actually, which we don't have here, but my favorite terrain is like kind of stuff you guys have up there where, you got the hills and the draws. There's just, that's where turkeys are meant to be hunted, in my opinion.
Right.
Yeah, I agree, man. Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota, that whole driftless region is like ideal, like just turkey country, man. It's really good. And I'm always curious, and Paul, I know you've gone down south. I haven't gone down south. I have a little bit of a loop where I basically try to just kind of hunt my surrounding states, but I'm curious in some of these other states, and Derek, maybe you can answer this, and Paul, some of these other states, good turkey hunting states, hill country gobblers, how does their terrain and their hills and their turkey country kind of compare to like the driftless region we were talking about in like Iowa, Minnesota, and Wisconsin?
Well, I mean, Alabama's got pretty decent hills in it. Mississippi's a little bit flatter than there are areas that have decent terrain to it, which,
right.
You're able to use the ridges to your advantage. You're able to use the creek bottoms to your advantage. You get up, and Georgia's got great. I mean, that's the southern end of Appalachia. It's pretty mountainous.
Right. I'd compare, the closest one in between Georgia and Mississippi. I would say Georgia would be the closest to what we got up here in southeastern Minnesota, and then I would say Mississippi would be more of a what you'd seen when you were down in northern Missouri. Except for when you get the woods are just generally a little bigger. Where northern Missouri gets a little more pasture and whatnot in there, then you get chunks of woods or draws or whatever that where they're wooded. Or Mississippi, it'll be pretty good stretches of woods with just little pockets of clearings or cutovers or logged areas and stuff like that for openings. But as far as the elevation changes, the rolling terrain is pretty similar. At least the northern part of Missouri. Then when you get or Mississippi, and then when you start getting into the central part, then you start getting into the Pine Belt. And that would, unless you're in, a floodplain, then the terrain would be pretty similar as well, I would guess. Just different. It was mostly pines and stuff instead of more hardwood dominated.
Of the 4 different subspecies, I know you said you're an eastern guy. Do you like Miriams over Rios or Rios over Miriams?
I would say Miriams over Rios, but definitely eastern's at the top of the list.
And is it Miriams over Rios over just kind of the terrain they live in?
A little bit of that, a little bit of the turkey itself. I think Miriams are absolutely beautiful. Yeah. Not that they all aren't. They just always kind of stood out to me, especially get the, if you're fortunate to get a real white one.
Yeah,
I've seen a couple real pretty ones. They're goofy, just the way they gobble. They gobble a lot. When you want to talk about roosting birds, if I'm in a Miriam's location, generally not going to be trying to slip in close to a roost, and I'm going to be very mobile at dark because the more ground I can cover, the better chances of finding a bird, because I feel like they're going to gobble at night. As long as the weather's somewhat decent, they're going to gobble at night. And, being mobile to drive up and down canyon roads and figure out where they're at, that's going to put you a lot closer to them in the morning.
Let me ask you this. When it comes to roosting Miriams, so I did the South Dakota Black Hills maybe a couple years ago. I did Wyoming last year. And for me, it was a little bit difficult to know if I was spending my time in the wrong area or the right area, just because I always hear about, oh, they love gobbling. So when I'd go out to roost in areas that I assumed were probably good spots and I didn't hear anything, I guess I used to just kind of mark that area off, But have you found it? So I had a conversation with the wildlife biologist over in South Dakota, mm-hmm. and he was pretty much telling me that, yes, they will gobble, but once Miriams, that they start feeling heavy pressure, he goes, they'll act like Easterns, man, and they'll shut up. They'll be there, but they're not going to talk, Is that something you've experienced of Miriams that kind of have shut mouths?
I've hit, actually, Black Hills region. I struggled a little bit to find birds.
Yeah.
But I just kept that mentality, I'm going to keep moving until I find them. And eventually that's what put me in the right scenario. Mm-hmm. Just stayed mobile until I found that group of birds that was feeling it. And those were the ones that I hunted. Might I have overlooked easier turkeys? Yeah, I'm sure. Absolutely. But if they weren't letting me know they were there, I wasn't just going to, go in blind and set up on birds that weren't talking when I had it in my head, I'm going to keep moving to find a turkey. And
for sure,
it works out.
So I got a question for you. So you're saying you don't use locator calls that much, and you're generally trying to locate with turkey calls. So when you go into the woods, what arsenal are you carrying in your vest? What types of calls? Are you strictly a diaphragm man? You got pots and slates and boxes and scratch boxes. What are you carrying?
I am a 95% of the time mouth call guy. That's what I'm comfortable with. I like being able to be hands-free. That way my hands are on a gun or on a camera. That is very, very, very important to me. I do carry a box call. I do enjoy that for, high volume locating, particularly out like Miriam's, hunting Miriam's. I love carrying a box call for that. Just to have something that's able to really reach out there, or a windy day, or when, I'm really trying to get one to gobble, a distance. I love a box call for that. I enjoy calling turkeys with the box call too, but generally I'm going to reach for the mouth call. I also carry an aluminum pot call, one striker, one pot call in the vest. That's all that goes with me. Outside of that, I'll have a little box that holds a handful of mouth calls, that one single pot call, and that one box call in my vest.
What cuts are going to be in your mouth calls?
I'm a batwing guy. That is
Me
my
too.
too.
Do you make your own calls, or is there a particular brand you like?
I do not. A couple brands that have favored over the years. Woodhaven Red Wing was always like one of my go-tos. I think I've completely all but replaced it now with the Houndstooth KB Hen. So I'm definitely not a brand snob. What works for me works for me. If I find another call tomorrow that works better than a Houndstooth, I'm going to run that. It's just what's making me feel like I got a chance. And for the longest time, I felt like the Red Wing was the only call that worked for me. And then that KB Hen has become a favorite for sure.
I'm pretty sure I picked up a houndstooth when I was down in Mississippi last spring, if I remember correctly, before I lost it.
Yeah.
Along with a coyote, 2 coyote calls, I'm pretty sure an owl call and a couple other diaphragms. But anyways, if I remember correctly, the houndstooth that I had got, it seemed like it was a pretty lightly stretched and pretty light latex in it. Is that something that you'd agree with?
The KB is it's a kind of a thick yellow latex over 2 clear.
So it wouldn't be the same.
So it's got a little bit of backbone to it, but it's definitely lighter than the Woodhaven that I was using before that.
Okay.
I've tried out that specific Woodhaven call. Would you say, at least I felt it was a little bit better kind of for softer stuff versus like really cranking on that thing? Or was it the opposite for you?
I actually kind of feel like that was a good crank on call for me.
Okay.
Like I'll still carry it. That would be my number 2 spot next to the KB Hen. And if it's a little windier day, I'll tend to gravitate towards the Woodhaven over the KB.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, cool. Well, Derek, I'd like to thank you for doing this. I'll be sure to let you know once we released your episode. And if you don't mind, man, I definitely want to get you back in here for a fall episode, and we could just talk fall turkeys.
Right. As soon as he said he got you on, he was talking about he wanted to get you for fall, so I know he's looking forward to that.
Because not everybody does fall. Some people really don't do it. Some people kind of don't do it. And I just kind of want to put some stuff out there for people that do it,
Right.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, sounds good. Fellas, I'll see you guys later.
Pleasure meeting you, Derek.
Yep. Thanks for having me on, fellas.
Well, thanks for being here.
Yep.
Thank you for listening to the Off the Roost podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, or whatever it is we're supposed to do. We greatly appreciate it. You can also follow us on Instagram at Off the Roost Calls and TikTok at Off the Roost Pod. Stay tuned for future episodes where we'll do our best to keep you informed and try to preserve the heritage that surrounds the elusive and sometimes mystical animal that is the wild turkey.